Hello, everybody. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are happy to have you with us on what's going to be a very fun Friday for us as we look at everything else kind of going on in the aftermath of Georgia having won the national championship. We're thinking about the roster management stuff going on at UGA. Obviously, Dogs getting back busy at work and recruiting both today and tomorrow. Of course, the national championship celebration on tap for Sanford Stadium tomorrow there as well. Hope to see a lot of you there for that. We're certainly excited about being there on the scene for that. I want to have some fun today on the show, which I'm really looking forward to. There's a big unanswered question I have with the Dogs. We'll tell you about that here coming up in just a little bit. And off the top today, I think if you're a Georgia fan, you got to start getting really prepared for something. And maybe you are prepared for it already. Maybe you kind of like the idea of this. But definitely the way in which you're going to hear your team discussed is about to really change in the future. In fact, I think it's already changing here right now. So I'm going to show you some examples of that, and I'll be interested to see how you all feel about this. So we'll do this here coming up. Glad to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I will tell you that one of the great thrills that I've had over the course of the last couple of years is that when the AJC, that's our kind of partner, corporate partner here at DawgNation, when the Atlanta Journal-Constitution has published their book celebrating the Georgia National Championship of last season, they invited me to be a part of it. And I got a chance to write, which you kind of call, like, I guess it's called the epilogue, I guess is the fancy phrase for this. It's sort of the column at the end of the book. And I will tell you, that was such an honor for me to be able to contribute to that and sort of share my thoughts, kind of representing the way we, a part of DawgNation, those of us who are longtime followers of this team, the way we felt about seeing Georgia win a national championship last year. And because of the storyline, knowing what you're going to write about in a situation like that, I think is really easy. You talk about the feeling, the passion that goes with long time, in some cases long-suffering Georgia fans finally seeing their team break through and win the national championship. That is a very easy narrative to explain in writing like that. I'm not a professional writer by trade, but even I can kind of help tell that story because the story's so obvious. But what about this year? What about when Georgia comes back and after waiting 40-plus years to win a national championship, what about not even hardly waiting 365 days to win the next one? Well, what do you write about then? So I am, once again, very, very thankful to be in the new book that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is publishing, celebrating Georgia's national championship, and I got a chance to kind of think about, well, what will this national championship sort of be remembered for? If last year's national title was remembered for Georgia fans finally seeing their team win it all, what will this year's national title be remembered for? And maybe different people might answer that question in different ways. But for me, what I'm writing in the piece that you can read in the books, on newsstands, you can go to ajc.com/dogsnews. You can buy it. In the piece that I wrote, my vision of all this is that Georgia fans now have to get really prepared to watch the way in which their team is covered change. To watch the way in which people talk about Georgia football kind of change. Because last year, they, whoever they are, media, other fans, other people, they may have been happy for you because you've been waiting a long time, wandering the wilderness, if you will, about winning a national championship. But some of those same folks who were happy for you last year, they're not happy for you anymore. They're going to be talking behind your back. Because all of a sudden now, instead of waiting so long to get the spotlight, now you're hogging the spotlight. Now you're getting greedy. Now you're stacking a national championship on top of a national championship. And so much of what we've done here in our sporting life has kind of watched teams like ours go up against the so-called evil empires of sports, Braves against Yankees or Falcons against Patriots in the Super Bowl a couple years ago, whatever else. Georgia, obviously, against the college ball version of that for a long time, Alabama. So much of that has been what our sporting life has been about. Could our team do battle with some evil empire and beat them? Well, now you better get used to the idea that your team is going to be viewed as an evil empire. And listen, some of us are more comfortable with that than others. I mean, I grew up as a professional wrestling fan, and there's a part of me that sort of always liked cheering for the bad guy. I think in real life, hopefully people consider me kind of a good guy, nice guy. At least I hope that's the way that I'm perceived. And so maybe my alter ego kind of likes the idea of playing the heel. Maybe every now and then I'll kind of do that on the show from time to time just because it's just sort of fun to do that. So I actually probably enjoy the idea of Georgia being kind of viewed as a villain in the eyes of some other people. I don't know that all of Dog Nation is going to feel that way, but whether you feel that way or not, you better get used to it because I think we see evidence that it's already happening. That all of a sudden now, Georgia, instead of being the team that was maybe at one point in time underachieving or last year, finally achieved this lifelong dream and it was sort of an emotional feel-good thing and there was lots of, ideas kind of connected to that. All of a sudden now, Georgia's a problem. All of a sudden now, Georgia's picking on people. All of a sudden now, I mean, look at the way in which Georgia won the national championship game, 65-7. I can promise you that was not received well by everybody across the landscape of the TV viewing audience, even college football. This notion of why you got to win 65-7? Why do you have to pile it on that much? Why do you have to be that aggressive? Why do you have to hoard all the talent that would even allow you to win a game like that? There's somehow an imbalance of resources. The Georgia, you just got too much going for you. You got to spread some of this out. You got to share some of the wealth with the rest of college football. This is too much congregated in too small of a place. If it's Georgia who's got this much talent. And in fact, this even extends beyond just sort of the regular stuff and kind of moves in the direction of stories that most of us would say are inarguably kind of a feel-good example of something that ought to be viewed as in a very positive light. Even some of that kind of stuff is being sort of spun in a negative way right now. I want to give you a brief example of this. Most of us would say that Stetson Bennett represents one of the best stories in all of college football. And not just college football for right now, but college football of all time. This was a guy who was a walk-on, as you know, a guy who had to even fight to get a scholarship opportunity at Georgia, was essentially told he'd never be the starter, became the starter, then lost the starting job, then got the starting job back, and finally went on to win 2 national championships, become a Heisman finalist. It is the textbook example of perseverance. It is the textbook example of what it means to really put all your effort towards something, to have a big goal in life and work tirelessly towards that big goal. It's the kind of thing that most of us would look to our own kids and say, hey, you ought to be more like Stetson Bennett. And one of the things that makes it even more fun and enjoyable is the fact that Bennett has done this along the way with a lot of folks doubting him every step of the way. I mean, isn't that amazing that so much of what Stetson has done has been in the face of so many critics who were there to say, hey, you're not good. You can't do this. You can't thrive. And yet Bennett kept on doing it anyway. But lo and behold, what most of us would say is an obviously positive story, is an example of just how much there should be a feel-good vibe around this Georgia team because of the role that Bennett played in winning the national championship. Even some people now are trying to turn the Stetson Bennett thing into a negative, trying to spin that into some sort of example of Georgia just being unfair for college football. In fact, let me give you Chris Russo here. Russo's a guy that, listen, my dream job when I was growing up was to be a sports radio host, and Russo was like the ultimate trailblazer in that field because he worked with Mike Francesa in New York for such a long time, kind of a trailblazer there. You see him on ESPN a lot now. And so Russo's been out there on his Sirius radio show, his XM radio show, his ESPN TV spots, essentially ripping into Stetson Bennett for what he says is a kind of an unfair advantage over his competition because Bennett is older than they are. This is an example of the way that Georgia's about to be treated. Even a guy like Stetson Bennett's the villain now. This is Chris Russo from his radio show.
I have not a little problem, I have a major problem with Stetson Bennett, 25 years of age, playing college football. I can see it for 1 year. Last year he won. Burrow was 23, going on 24 when he won. But 25 years of age, playing quarterback for Georgia, he should have left after last year. I didn't know that he was that old. And I understand we have punters who are 50 from Australia punting. I have a problem with a 25-year-old playing against 19-year-old kids. I had a problem with Winicky doing it for Florida State when he won the Heisman. I didn't vote for him for that reason. And I understand that Bennett's story is a hell of a story. We all know about the walk-on and told to leave and everything else. I understand that. But he's older than 10 NFL quarterbacks.
So now think about this for a moment. Think about how amazing this is. At one point in time, guys like Chris Russo would have probably told us Stetson Bennett wasn't even good enough to play. And all of a sudden now he's so good that it's unfair. Like, imagine how that's kind of evolved. Like last year, it's like, who does Georgia think they are playing this guy at quarterback? This guy will never win a national championship. Well, then he wins 2 national championships. And all of a sudden now it's, well, he has an unfair advantage because he's 25 years old. Like that's how quickly the narrative can change. And the way in which Stetson Bennett's being treated now is the way in which Georgia's about to be treated in every step of the way here moving forward. That somehow Georgia is so good that it's unfair, that somehow Georgia is so good that it's a bully, that somehow Georgia is taking advantage of weaker and lesser competition, that's kind of the way that Georgia's about to be treated. And for some Georgia fans, they're like, good, bring it on. I like the idea of that. I don't like these people anyway. For other Georgia fans, they sort of like the idea of thinking of their team as the good guy, and maybe this is about to be a little bit weird. But the way that Bennett gets treated right there is the way that everybody's going to be treating Georgia moving forward. Even the stories that you think of as sort of feel good and obviously positive and the kind of thing that you want to, rally around and tell your kids about, somebody somewhere is going to find a way to turn it into a negative thing. Somebody somewhere is going to kind of turn it into a bad thing and use this as an example of what they're going to start, I think, overwhelmingly trying to describe as an unfair advantage for UGA. The point is, last year you won the national championship. People felt good for you. People were happy about you. At least they sort of pretended to be happy to your face. All of a sudden now, they're not even doing that anymore. All of a sudden now, Georgia's going to be a very, very big problem for a lot of folks around college football. They're about to be treated as the villain, I would certainly say, in more ways than one. All right, let me quickly shift gears and talk about something else here just for a moment. Obviously, we're excited about seeing all of you tomorrow in Athens. We're looking forward to that big championship celebration. So going to be going on tomorrow. We're going to be there for the parade. We're going to be inside the stadium. So DawgNation's going to have coverage of this kind of throughout the day. And I know there had been some talk about trying to get the tickets, and my wife said, because she got tickets for her and my kids, she said it was actually kind of a challenging process. A lot of this stuff sort of ends up being, kind of on hold, waiting for a while, then wondering if you had them, then actually, finally making, confirming that she did. So a lot of work to get them, it sounds like. The entire south side of the stadium, which is a pretty big, it takes up a huge portion of the stadium. That's not going to be available for ticketing. In fact, the press box is even going to be moved to a different place for this event because of some ongoing construction. So there's a little bit of a challenge related to that. Some of the parking stuff is going to probably be a little bit of a challenge. But we know this, those of us who were there last year, this is one of those days that if you can be a part of it, you just don't want to miss it. I mean, you just don't want to. And, to get up close and personal during that parade route and watch the players come by, the level of happiness that they enjoy, to be inside the stadium. And there was an element of this last year where I just can't believe we're here and we're doing this, that we're watching Georgia celebrate a national championship right here in the stadium and doing all of this the way they were, and then to lo and behold think that you're coming back and you're doing it all over again. That Georgia went out and got 2 in 22, and all of a sudden now it's back-to-back Dawg National champions. It's going to be a fun day. So for those of you who are going to be there, I can't wait to see you. Please make sure you come by and say hello to us, because I am just looking forward to being a part of that with all of you. And if you can't be there for whatever reason, I have heard from some Georgia fans who would like to be there and they just can't. If you're not going to be able to be there, then stay close to the social channels, Twitter, Instagram, things like that. Obviously, the website, DawgNation.com, YouTube page, going to have a bunch of video stuff up there as well. Stay close on all of that. We're going to try to provide a lot of coverage for you to make you feel like you are there, even if you couldn't be there. So it's going to be a fun day. We're really excited about being a part of it and can't wait to see as many of you as possible in Athens tomorrow there as well. So in other words, the entire country may be booing Georgia for winning back-to-back national championships. They may treat them like a villain, but they're our heroes. We look forward to celebrating them tomorrow. And thank you for being with us here today. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. Obviously, we start at 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. And, of course, podcast form, as many different places you can find those podcasts all across the Apple, Spotify, everything else. Just glad to have you as a part of our program here today. And a big thanks to our friends at Kroger for making it all possible. By the way, Kroger's got something great for you this month there, too. You've heard us talk about this before, especially for those of you who have kids. It's called Kroger Chef Junior. It's a guided kids cooking experience where you can join a local Kroger chef there to experience making a delicious food item. Now, I think it's always really fun to sort of teach kids how food is prepared. Kind of gets them more interested in some things that maybe they ought to be eating. In fact, this month, how good does this sound for kind of like this winter time of year? The dumpling sandwich. January 21st is your next opportunity for this Kroger Chef Jr. and a chance to make that dumpling sandwich. It's a 30-minute class. It's a guided kids cooking experience. It's just $7 per child. And in addition to cooking the dumpling sandwich, you also get the apron and patch, a chef's hat, a recipe card and box, and, of course, a dumpling maker. So it's all really fun. You can go to the website, KrogerChefJr.com, for more on that. It's Kroger Chef Jr., the word junior spelled out Junior. Kroger Chef Jr. for a lot more on that. All right, let's go around the DawgHouse. It's presented today by Berkshire Hathaway Home Service. We will get Jeff Sentell here in a moment, and there's a lot to get into with Jeff. In addition to a great celebration tomorrow for the national championship, Georgia also is going to be busy recruiting. They have a huge day today. Apparently, they have plans of visiting 10 different schools here in just this day alone. So that means the Kirby copter almost for sure is going to be flying and heading all across the state. So we'll find out more about that from Jeff, and also some big visitors expected to be on hand for the big celebration tomorrow. Now, it wouldn't be me if I wasn't a little bit fixated on somebody who's not expected to be there. So we'll talk to Jeff about what that might mean for the 2024 class too. So we're really busy about all that. Also, before we're done, I am going to ask my biggest unanswered question from the 2022 season. And when I first ask it, you may kind of laugh a little bit. But then after that, I think you're about, yeah, that is actually kind of an interesting question. So we'll do that today before we're all set and done. But for now, it's Around the DawgHouse. It's presented by Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. And a great listener of our sort of DawgNation family here, her name is Heather Capello. She sent this to me the other day. So a lot of you are aware that there was a speech leaked from Kirby Smart during the game on Monday. A lot of people are saying this was from the TCU game. I have it on pretty good authority that it was not from the TCU game. It's not obvious what game it was from, but I have it on pretty good authority it was not actually from TCU, even though it's kind of being treated as it was from TCU. But the point is, it's like as classic Kirby as you can get from one of these locker room speeches where, I mean, listen, it's pretty aggressive. It's pretty profane. It's the kind of thing that I couldn't play for you in a show like this because we try to sort of maintain some sort of family-friendly type deal. I definitely couldn't play it on the radio because FCC regulations would not allow that at all. And so, you know, at different times, you're left to wonder, okay, well, here's this very interesting content. It's not appropriate for a family audience. It doesn't meet, you know, FCC standards. So how do you get this out here at all? Well, Heather Capello shared something with me. It was actually very similar to something we've done in the past. And so we're going to do a little bit of a tale of the tape here and decide who did it best. So Danny Kanell, who does a radio show, former Florida State quarterback, he's an analyst and, you know, kind of a noted SEC hater. But the truth is I don't hate Kanell all that much. But Kanell was on his radio show, and he did something similar to something we had done in the past. Heather Capello shared this, of taking this very profane Kirby Smart rant and trying to put a little bit of a pro-family spin on it to make it a little bit more accessible for a broad audience. Heather shared this with me. Let's hear Kanell's twist on this first and decide how he did and who did it better between Kanell here this week or me last year. Here's Danny Kanell first.
And I have 3 daughters. I often like to go in and tuck them in before they go to bed and maybe give them a little motivational talk, or we'll do a little devotion, a little prayer time. This is Kirby Smart's pregame speech reimagined as a bedtime story.
Your ass is prepared for this for 365 days. I think about the in that locker room, thinking about getting our opportunity, all the you went through this week to get ready for this game. Now is when you pay the price.
So that's Danny Kanell's attempt to put like a pro-family spin on obviously what's a pretty profane Kirby Smart speech. So you got that going on. Now, as Heather pointed out, we did this same bit last year because you'll remember the Kirby Smart halftime speech came out from Florida. Now, we do know for a fact that was from the Florida game. So we know the origin of that particular speech. And once again, it's really good content. It's Kirby Smart in kind of a way in which you don't normally get a chance to see Kirby Smart, although we're hearing more and more of this as the years go on. So maybe it's not quite as rare as it used to be. But the point is that it's one of those things of, okay, clearly this is audio worth playing, but I can't play it in this form. I can't just throw this out here to the folks. I mean, people can go hear it on their own and kind of make their own judgment what they want. But we have a certain standard we try to follow around here about the kinds of content we present. We want this to be a show that's accessible for families. And as I said before, we also air on the radio there as well. We have to be very, very mindful of FCC regulations, something that a lot of these, crazy folks on the internet don't have to worry about. We got to, we're a professional broadcast here. We got to be careful about that kind of stuff. So I said, let's take the Kirby speech from 2021. This is last year we did this. By the way, Danny Kanell stepping on our corner here a little bit, but I'm going to ignore that part of this. So I said, let's take the Kirby speech from 2021 and let's see if we can make this accessible for broadcast. We did this about a year ago. Kanell did this week. Let's now compare. Who did it better, Kanell that you just heard or me last year? Here was me after the Florida game last season.
You know what, guys?
Flipping. Flipping.
Here we do it how we play. It's 0 to
Flipping.
0, and you make them never want to play again. Don't say
Stop.
so they're undisciplined.
Behinds.
We are disciplined. Physically, I want to break them. I'm talking about
Flipping.
breaking
Gentlemen.
on defense and offense.
So maybe I'm being, self-serving here. I sort of feel like my twist on this might have been better than Danny Kanell's, but people can decide for themselves. Kanell did have music underneath it, so he had the extra production element that I didn't have. But nonetheless, Kanell, he had his family-friendly spin on the Kirby Smart speech. As Heather Capello pointed out on social media, we had done that last year, so a little bit of a side-by-side comparison there on that, but pretty funny stuff, and I'm glad that Heather shared that, and I think Kanell did do a pretty good job with his. So that is Around the DawgHouse. It's presented today by our friends at Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, and obviously so many folks here in this kind of new time of year, as you think about your goals and your ambitions for the upcoming year, for some of you that involves a real estate decision. It's time to maybe sell the house you're living in now because the new home that you want gets you closer to something you really desire, like a brand new job or, fun time with friends who live across town, or maybe you got family somewhere along the way that you want to get a little closer to. There are lots of reasons for making a real estate move, for getting a new home or selling a house that you have been living in. Lots of reasons for you to do that. And Berkshire Hathaway Home Service understands that those reasons are really important to you and that it creates kind of an exciting new tomorrow for you. Well, the best time for new beginnings is now, our friends at Berkshire Hathaway Home Service would say. So it's time to reach out and talk to one of their real estate agents about how they can help you get to where you want to be in this new year. And by the way, that's not necessarily just for a home purchase. It can also be for a commercial real estate purchase there as well. Maybe you've had a home-based business, and it's time to sort of take that to the next level by having that storefront, by having that warehouse space, whatever it is that kind of helps you take that where it needs to go. Our friends at Berkshire Hathaway Home Service can help you with that. Or maybe it's time to be an investor. You've watched the TV shows where they do this, and so you want to say, if I can do that there as well, whether it's flipping a home for short term or holding a rental income property over the course of the long haul. Our friends at Berkshire Hathaway Home Service can help you with that too. These are transaction experts. These are people who've been through real estate purchasing and selling situations many, many times before. And they can use that experience, that expertise to help you. So find them online at bhhsgeorgia.com. That's bhhsgeorgia.com. All right, before we are done, I told you, I have the biggest unanswered question for Georgia in 22. And when I ask it, I think you'll probably agree, although you may laugh slightly. So we'll do that here coming up before we're done. We also have some great golden shoes today there as well. But for now, very, very busy time for UGA recruiting. The championship celebration on Saturday also provides the opportunity to host some elite recruits and the possibility of on commit watch here today, plus at least one name that I wish was going to be in Athens that's apparently not going to be. We'll find out what that means there too. So it is a lot to do in the world of recruiting. Let's do it all as we go on the road with Jeff Sentell, assisted by AAA.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So much to cover with Jeff Sentell here as we're on the road, assisted by AAA. And by the way, my national championship pillow will not stay standing up here today. I need my scarf back. I need my scarf to represent the national championship celebration. But nonetheless, we'll try to keep the pillow up here. And we'll also welcome in Jeff Sentell there as well, who I believe was with me when the pillow was originally procured late on a Monday night, stolen out of the media lounge there in Los Angeles. But the point, though, Jeff, is in the aftermath of this national championship, we have a lot of recruiting to talk about. And the possibility that Georgia could be on commit watch here today is Jalen Hayward, a very impressive safety prospect out of the state of Florida, as he gets set to make his announcement. boy, Jeff, this is one of those things that Georgia fans kind of shaking off the hangover of the national championship, the jet lag from having been in Los Angeles, and you realize we are right in the midst of a very busy run-up here for the class of 2024, and it could include a big decision from Hayward later on today. What can you tell us about this right now?
Morning, everybody. First of all, I don't know if you guys are following along with this on social media, but Kirby Smart, the Georgia staff, they're doing what Georgia coaches do right after winning a back-to-back national championship, and that's, I don't know, maybe Smokey and the Bandit or Fast and Furious, hammer down style on the recruiting trail. Today's the first day they can be back out, Brandon, and every Georgia coach has a pledge to hit 10 high schools in the state of Georgia today. That's 10 coaches on the road, 10 schools apiece. They're going to do 100 high school visits today. Kirby Smart's already been to Gainesville High School. He's already been to Jefferson High School. Todd Hartley and Brian McClendon, they've already been to Colquitt County to see down south Georgia boy commitments, Nye Carr and Landon Thomas. All the big names are going to be visited. They're going to be in town tomorrow. Like you said earlier, Brandon, we got Jalen A.P. Crawford, who's a top 40 overall prospect in the country. He is going to be making his decision. Georgia is among his Final Four there. Man, it is almost a mouthful of things you got going on here. Georgia's got the number one edge in the country coming to visit this weekend. He's never visited before. They've got the number one target, I think, on the board for 2024 outside of Dylan Raiola coming to visit as well. I mean, it is gangbusters, man.
Yeah, it really is exciting. What can you tell us about Jalen in particular, though, as to why this might be a name worth paying attention to?
So let's pay attention here. Georgia, which stacked up the number 3, the number 4, and the number 5 linebackers in 2023, that could end up closing with the number 1, 3, 5, and 8 tight ends in 2023. Well, 2024, they've already got the nation's number 2 safety committed, and Peyton Woodyard, and I think Jalen A.P. Crawford out of Florida. Brandon, he's a guy that can run a 10.68 in 100 meters. Has liked Georgia for a considerable amount of time. He's got a Final Four: Ohio State, Florida, Alabama, Georgia. Number 34 overall prospect in the country, and this is a prospect. I spoke to him this week. He does not care who's there. He does not care who's committed. I mean, Brandon, it's almost like we're bending the rules of quantum recruiting reality, where somehow at Georgia, the more players that are top 5 at your position, it becomes more of a tractor beam than it does at a turn.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, Georgia obviously played a freshman significant snaps this year. In fact, I think he may have had about the most snaps of anybody in Malachi Starks, and obviously a guy like Janelle Aguero coming in. He's kind of already turned heads during this all-star camp season, and a guy like Hayward could kind of follow in the footsteps on all of that. Now, you mentioned the assistant coaches are out traveling and Georgia, getting out in a very aggressive way here today. I want to talk to you more about that in a moment. But as kind of a lead-in for that, we're also kind of in that time right now, Jeff, where roster management's ongoing. We've seen some names going into the NFL draft, guys like Jalen Carter and Keely Ringo. Nothing too unexpected as of yet on that. Darnell Washington's in there now. We see some guys going to the transfer portal. Obviously, Rylan Goody kind of comes to mind. They're on that. Jaheim Singletary among the notable names because Singletary just got here a year ago, but I don't even think that was necessarily all that surprising just based on some of the chatter that's been out there. I think Georgia would like to have kept Singletary, but, this had been rumored on the internet for a little bit. What do you make of kind of the phase that Georgia's in right now of it's clearly bringing in some guys, Ra and Dominic out of the transfer portal, obviously all the signees, but also it's in the midst of finding out who it's losing to between NFL and transfer portal. This is a very busy time right now where those turnstiles are kind of spinning with guys coming in and going out of the program too.
Yeah, let me be very clear here, Brandon. Let's call it pruning, let's call it culling, let's call it making market correction decisions. One of the things I noticed at Alabama the last 2 years, Brandon, they swung and missed like your dad throwing wiffle ball to you when you were 4 years old on offensive linemen. You look and saw a lot of their offensive linemen over the last couple of cycles. They didn't get hits at all on, even those 5-star guys, those highly rated guys. Look what's happening here for Georgia with its 2022 offensive line room class. Jacob Hood entering the portal moments ago, or the news is coming out this morning. Jacob Hood, that was the big kind of project offensive lineman out of Tennessee. Guy that didn't play his senior year, had to shed a lot of weight was going through some body transformation. He's a mountain of a young man, 6'8", 350, something like that. You're going to look at Georgia's 2022 class, those signees there, without specifically naming names. And the thing that you got to wonder about is Georgia doing that with its 2022 class. Really, Brandon, on the offensive line, the only one that really showed a lot of promise in his first season on campus was Ernest Green III out of St. John Bosco. Georgia might be going through a little bit of rotation there with its offensive line class in 2022, hopefully trying to avoid maybe the lull that Bama had in its program with a couple of over classes with those high-profile, high-impact, high-value offensive linemen.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's way too early to start getting too worried about, 2023 as of yet. But I will tell you on paper, I am a little concerned about the offensive line depth right now. I mean, if you've got Amarius Mims starting at, let's say, left tackle, well, you've clearly got one of the best players in the country, I think, and you couldn't ask for much more than that. Ernest Green certainly seems like a fantastic prospect if he's able to start on the other side, and you would probably feel okay about that even though he's inexperienced. But this is probably less tackle depth in the program right now than we're used to seeing Georgia have, and I would say that's probably true by a long shot. So you're kind of zeroing in on an area that I'm sort of already thinking a little bit about next year, especially if we find out that Cedric Von Granger is going to the NFL draft, which he very easily could, is that Georgia would really be breaking in a lot of new faces at the offensive line, replacing some hugely influential players over the course of the last couple of years as some of these NFL draft decisions go the way we think they might.
Yeah, and I mean, you sit there and, 2023s, Brandon, I got to say it, I just spent a few seconds talking about the 2022s. Brandon, there are so many guys in the 2021 class. Remember that heralded class, Jared Wilson, Dylan Fairchild, Micah Morris? Brandon, it's kind of their turn to come in and move in and get some reps, and their turn to play, because those guys have shown a little bit of promise, a little bit of bloom on the roads a little bit during their time in Athens. And, it's one of those guys, you throw Mims in there as well. I mean, it's one of those things you heard Kirby Smart say a lot, Brandon. It is a grown man league in the SEC, and young players are not supposed to play right away in the trenches. It says something more about your team than it does about the quality of prospect that's coming in. Those young men that can do that are very, very rare. Andrew Thomas, guys like that. I mean, even Broderick Jones, Jamari Salyer, Cedric Von Granger, none of those guys, Warren McClendon, none of those guys even played in their first year. So when you bring in guys like this, I think the 2023 line class is promising, especially with a guy like Monroe Freeling. You got Bo Hughley. You got Kelton Smith. You wonder who the center is going to be, Brandon. I know that's a lot of talk for February, March, April, May in terms of Georgia and the center, especially if SVPG decides to take his talents to the Sunday League. But, I think when we start talking about it, you want to sound really smart about Georgia in 2023. I think the hot-button position is obviously the offensive line and not the quarterback position.
So let me go back to a name I mentioned a moment ago. Jaheim Singletary was obviously a huge signee when Georgia got it, a part of one of the most impressive defensive back classes we've ever seen anyone have. And yet, honestly compels you to admit here is that, like a guy like Dalen Everett, another freshman in that class, kind of got talked about a lot, obviously, generate some buzz, even if he wasn't playing a ton. But Singletary just kind of didn't. And this is not me burying a guy that's no longer at Georgia, because I think that Georgia probably would like to have kept him. I mean, obviously you bring a guy like that in, you want to see him grow and develop. But it is noticeable that there just wasn't a ton of buzz about Singletary once he got here. What do you make of that? The fact that he arrived, never really made seemingly much of a name for himself, and now just as quickly as he got here, he's moving on. What's your spin and take on the Singletary story?
I think it's just a body type, Brandon. I think one of the things is he kind of was under the radar a lot. His recruitment didn't do a lot of media. I had a lot of folks reach out to me over the last day or so and say, well, man, I really never even got to know Jaheim Singletary at all. They called him slim, Brandon. I think that was the thing. He needed to put on weight. He wasn't really ready to play in the SEC. Back and forth, you heard things that maybe the plan was him for always to look at a red shirt anyway because of that size. But, Brandon, I think it is what it is. I think these young men see a guy like Dalen Everett. I think they see Kamari Lassiter, Nyland Green. They see a young man like A.J. Harris kind of barnstorming his way through bowl practices. And they get a real good sense of a guy that's going to move up the depth chart quick. And they're just kind of going to look for their own fit somewhere else. And, again, another thing, Brandon, you see with Georgia, a lot of times when guys get the ring and they get that memory, then they want to go get the stats and the reps and the film. And That's what a lot of these things would be built and designed to do, is try to find a lot of these young men maybe a better spot. The one thing I will say about the portal is the portal giveth and the portal taketh away, Brandon. And sometimes young men can just go in the portal and see what's out there.
Yeah.
And it may not be an absolute certainty that they don't return to Athens if they don't find exactly what they're looking for.
There was also a tweet, and I believe it's been deleted, by Julian Humphrey, and who knows what any tweet means. This wasn't obviously clear in its meaning, but Humphrey's another one of these guys that kind of came in with a lot of fanfare, flipped from Florida, and he's also a guy we haven't heard a ton about since he's been here. You have any insight about how a guy like Julian Humphrey may be viewing the situation at Georgia right now?
Yeah, I think Humphrey's interesting, Brandon, because he does have a pro, kind of that NFL, that SEC-ready body. He got to Georgia about 195. He had a lot of great speed. And, Brandon, you saw a lot more of Humphrey early in the season in those backup fourth quarters when Stetson Bennett wasn't throwing passes around. I think Humphrey is a guy that maybe made more of an impact, more of an imprint in Athens in that 2022 class. He's fast. He's big. He's got the body for it. And that's one of the things at Georgia corner. You look at corners, that's one of those things where if a guy like Singletary moves on, then it creates a little bit more reps and a little bit more of a position for corners especially. And, Brandon, let's be very clear here. This is not just a sample size of a week here or right now for transfer portal. This will take place after this month. It will take place after spring practice and a lot of positions like that where you're going to find out where those guys that are maybe hanging on a little bit, they want to see where things stand after spring practice.
By the way, perfect transition here when you start thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow in Athens with the national championship celebration. As you said, Georgia's kind of already put it out there on social media that they got 10 coaches going 10 places today. They're literally going to blanket the state here in the aftermath of the national championship, as you would expect they would. Now that they can kind of get back on the road. But also they're hosting a bunch of guys, here on the weekend. I believe you've reported it was already set to be kind of a big junior day in Athens, even if it wasn't a national championship celebration. And now because of the fact the trophy's going to be there and the parade and stuff's going to take place makes it even more valuable. We just talked about some defensive backs who, in one case, may be on his way out. In another case, you're left to wonder. Well, Georgia, I believe, set to host Ellis Robinson tomorrow. That's one of the top cornerbacks in the country for the class of 2024. I believe you've kind of reported that's sort of the headline name here for this weekend. What else can you kind of tell us about the weekend, both in terms of who is going to be in Athens? I eventually want to get to a guy that I don't think is going to be there, which I think is kind of interesting. I want to find out more from you about. But between who is going to be in Athens on Saturday, where Georgia's going to be today, what sort of stands out to you about this weekend for Georgia in recruiting as you really start to get it going here for the class of 2024?
Yeah, so there's a lot to get your arms around here. Peyton Woodyard, the recent 2024 commitment, Brandon, he's in California. He just told me he's going to be in Athens this weekend as well. Crazy how these young men crisscross flights to see these big Georgia moments, especially already committed. Mike Matthews, Brandon, that's the talented Mercurial wide receiver out of Parkview High School in Gwinnett County. He will not be there. He's actually in Tennessee this weekend. KJ Bolden, another five-star safety in the 2024 class, really feeling a certain type of way about Georgia, really tells me that really certainly feels like home to him. He will not be in Athens. He will be in Arizona for a 7-on-7 event and a family trip. Those are the names that are not there. The names that will be there, Brandon, I think, despite the five-star quarterback stuff there with Dylan Raiola, I think the most important recruiting target, the guy that is the top target on the Before the Hedges top targets list for 2024, back when that debuted back in November of 2022, Edric Houston out of Buford. He's going to be there.
Is that right?
Huge visit there, Brandon. It's really going to feel like, to me, it's Georgia or Ohio State there. That's a guy that, obviously the Dogs, I'm going to just say it, they absolutely have to sign a guy like that if they want to keep doing Georgia-type things, especially on the defensive front. Colin Simmons, Brandon, a guy that you hear a lot of Texas A&M, the number one edge in the country. He's taking his first trip to Georgia this weekend, Brandon. He told me he wants Georgia to knock his socks off because he thinks he's a Dog. He feels like the Dogs, they're a preeminent brand in college football, and he wants to see what those Dogs are about. Brandon, very special prospect here. Kadaria Uzo-Deribe is on him. He doesn't have that ideal 6'4" length for edge, but he's got everything else. Pay close attention to Colin Simmons this weekend. Micah Parsons, NFL All-Pro Micah Parsons, has taken a special interest in Simmons and his game because he thinks that is such a special type young man, special type talent growing up in Texas. And also, Brandon, Ellis Robinson IV, man, great connection there with Georgia. He tells me Georgia's his leader, Brandon. That's the nation's #1 cornerback in the country. He will be back in Athens. He can't think of a single stinking negative thing to say about Athens. His family loves Georgia. His older brother loves Georgia. He's back here this weekend for a couple of days, and he has loved Georgia since the jump. Again, nation's #1 corner, 5-star, IMG Academy for 2024, Brandon. It really feels like Georgia football, and I used this metaphor earlier, but it feels like somebody's hit the nitrous oxide on this. And when it thinks, recruiting doesn't stop at the University of Georgia, well, really what it does is it takes light speed jumps, it takes acceleration points, and this is one curve going into the championship celebration and the parade this weekend that the Dogs are really leaning into with a lot of momentum, a lot of 5-stars coming, the right 5-stars coming. They've got top 100 recruits. They've got commitment watch today. They're going to visit 100 schools today, Brandon, when some schools are like, are we kidding me? What are we doing here? That's just how the Dogs get down, man.
I want to ask you about Mike Matthews because you brought him up. But first, let me remind folks, this is On the Road, assisted by AAA with Jeff Sentell here today. And, of course, we love AAA for its legendary roadside assistance. I also like it when I'm traveling, get great discounts on hotels, things like that. But it's a great name to know when it comes to your auto insurance there as well. They've been doing auto insurance more than 100 years. And that span of time, they have taken great care of a lot of people. In fact, they have a 93% satisfaction rate. So if that many people are bragging about AAA, we believe they can do great things for you there, too. So give them a call to find out more. 833-718-2075. 833-718-2075. You can find out more about AAA, what they can do for you on the auto insurance front here today. All right, Jeff, I promise I won't finish our conversation on a negative note. I promise that. But I do got to ask him, because I think that Mike Matthews is probably the most exciting player in the state of Georgia for the class of 2024 out of Parkview. He's going to Tennessee this weekend. At least that's what the internet says, as opposed to coming to Athens. What is he doing? Man, get down here to Athens where you need to be. Don't be going up there and seeing that mess up in Tennessee. I like Matthews a lot. That's a player I'd love to see Georgia sign. Does it mean anything that he's going to Tennessee instead of going to Georgia here this particular weekend?
I don't think it means anything. I think, Brandon, it means maybe they asked first. I think it means he knows that's a quarterback receiver friendly offense where you can get a bunch of yards. I wouldn't worry about Matthews. Matthews, Brandon, has some pretty strong ties to Georgia, family-related ties that I don't think I'll get into right now at this point. But he also plans. I would look for him to visit Georgia in the next couple of weeks, sometime in January, regardless. That's a guy. Receivers, Brandon. I know you froth at the mouth at receiver. I mean, I don't know. If I could pin you to this already on January, the 12th or 13th of 2023, but if I could tell you Raiola, Edric Houston, Mike Matthews, and another 5-star to be named later becomes the core of the Georgia 2024 class, I think you take it right now.
Yeah, we've talked about this off the air, that I've got 2 big wish list names. Now, listen, ultimately you got a lot more than this, but I'm talking about in terms of the actual big needle movers. There are 2 big in-state names for me. Edric Houston's on the defensive side of the ball. Mike Matthews, who I think of as a wide receiver, is on the offensive side of the ball. Then obviously nationally, it's Raiola as the quarterback prospect. But those are my 3 big, those are the guys that I think move the needle far more than anybody else possibly could here in this class. Houston just looks like a Georgia player. He looks as much like a Georgia player as any recruit possibly could, and I do think Matthews is dazzling. Now, a moment ago, you said you don't think that Georgia should be worried about anything as it relates to this, but, this is the big storyline for the class of 2024, Jeff, and gosh knows we got, months to get into this, but this is that class in which Georgia's going to try to break through in an area in which they typically have not done well. Gwinnett County, and Matthews is out of Parkview. You got the Buford guys. It seems like Georgia's in a pretty good spot right now to say a guy like KJ Bolden. You've obviously got Jordan Perlotti for the class of 2025, which maybe gives you an indication that Georgia's breaking through in a big way to a place like Buford where they haven't really cleaned house before. But some of the big names we're going to be talking about in this class are those Gwinnett County dudes. Bolden, Houston out of Buford, Matthews out of Parkview at the very least. This is – it's weird to say this because it's an hour from campus, but this is sort of a final frontier for Georgia recruiting. Can you go into that county that hasn't always been very favorable to you, and can you win with the 5 stars who are in there right now?
But I never thought we'd say this. Especially after what happened with Gwinnett County with 2 5-stars in 2023. But does it even matter anymore? Does the Gwinnett County vortex of all those transplants and all those guys that didn't grow up deep down South Georgia boys that moved in from out of the state? Georgia has shown that it does not need to own Gwinnett County in order to stack up natties, like as Kendall Milton once instructed us many years ago in California when he said he's coming to Georgia for natties, plural, not natties one, and he did that. It's almost like, Brandon, all things that used to worry a Georgia football fan in DawgNation, and especially Mr. Adams sitting there on the desk next to your L.A. cozy pillow. You don't need to be really comfortable in Gwinnett County to win championships, although it would certainly be a luxury.
All right, so I told you I wouldn't finish on a negative note. So here's I guess I said this to our audience before you joined us. This is like in our video segment prior to the show beginning. I think what a lot of Georgia fans hoped they would see last year, I do think you're seeing right now. At least I get the sense you're seeing it right now. Last year when Georgia won the national championship, there were a lot of Georgia fans who were like, well, where's the natty bump in recruiting? You didn't really feel like you were getting that, especially spring and summer. Now, by the time the class was done, it was an elite class the way all Georgia classes are. But to begin with, you weren't getting much of a national championship recruiting bump. In fact, Kirby Smart himself said that he wasn't seeing the national championship matter much to recruits during that class of 2023. Well, maybe that was true for the previous cycle or the cycle that's coming to a close here in February. Maybe that was true then. Jeff, to the best I can tell, it seems like Georgia does have a lot of recruiting momentum here right now. Now, maybe it's not solely based on back-to-back national champions, but Georgia's sort of recruiting on the heels of a back-to-back Dawg National champion, go for 2-22 run. They're sort of recruiting right now the way you would expect a team that just won back-to-back titles to recruit. When you think about Rayola and you think about some of the other names that are out there that seemingly Georgia's trending with, it sort of feels like they're getting the natty bump now that some folks wish they would have gotten last year.
Brandon, could not be hotter. You think about it. When's the last L Georgia took on the recruiting trail? I mean, you got to go back to early signing day, and you remember the good news with Kyron Jones. You remember the good news with Damon Wilson. You remember the good news that Georgia stacked up the next day with Jordan Big Baby Hall. Then you remember Peyton Woodyard on the All-American Bowl. You hear the news about Rayola, the barnstorming that's happening today, the mushrooming of feelings there with Rayola. You've got Ellis Robinson, you've got Colin Simmons, you've got Edric Houston. It seems like everything is funneling, and that whole metaphor everybody goes to about the Death Star and the Emperor, and it just feels like you can hear the Imperial March in the background, except there's no Jedis around to counteract this. That's what it feels like right now when it comes to Georgia football recruiting.
Jeff, great stuff. Thank you so much for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you in Athens tomorrow. Going to be a great day for DawgNation indeed. Obviously a very important time for UGA recruiting. We'll keep our ear to the ground on what may come out of the 2024 class, maybe later on today as well. And, Jeff, the best I can tell, it's going to be a pretty busy year. So let's get ready to talk about some big-time elite recruits making their decision to come to Georgia and how they may fit into a future Georgia program that's got plenty more national championships to win. So it'll be a fun time, Jeff. Glad to have you with us as we discuss it.
Brandon, how about this, man? It's in honor and in spirit and tribute to Georgia and what the Dogs are getting done on the field and on the recruiting trail. I think you should go ahead and give out 100 golden shoes today. I think you got it in you. I think you should go for it. Spread that, sprinkle it, let it rain like confetti. Golden shoe the whole audience today, man. Take it easy, everybody. Love you. See you in Athens, everybody.
Good stuff, Jeff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, it's going to be like Oprah giving out cars. You get a golden shoe, and you get a golden shoe, and you get a golden shoe. Maybe one of these days that's exactly what we will do. Great stuff there from Jeff Sentell. We've also got a lot more to do on today's show, including some golden shoes before it's all said and done. Before that, though, we have got to go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I will tell you, it has been fun being back home from L.A. because, like, the one thing we knew is that we were going to have kind of a family vacation coming up in February as a way of, just kind of rebooting. Listen, we all kind of need a break after a while. I love my job, and I love the run that we've been on. But it's kind of nice to also sort of step away and kind of have that family vacation time. And my kids, with me getting back home, that kind of a signal to them. We're getting really close to taking that cruise. So, man, I'm really excited about that. I can't wait to tell you more about the family cruise that we have going on and the fun that's going to be. And I got to tell you, I am getting more and more excited about our Dog Nation cruise coming up as well. And the thing that's got me so excited is just how much the response, I mean, it's been amazing. And I told you yesterday, I'm getting pretty close to being told I cannot promote it anymore because we are literally going to be packed to the rafters full. I have not been given the no on this yet, but I do. I've heard from Dog Nation audience who say that they're kind of in the queue to kind of get booked up to be there. So I do know that we've had kind of a flood of sort of final, okay, I guess I will go. I was on the fence, now I'm going. We've had sort of a final kind of a rush here to kind of get those final staterooms. So I'm telling you right now that if you want to get in, like they used to say at the varsity, you better show up with your money in your hand, your order on your mind, and get in there and get it booked and be ready to be there because we are about to be done, be locked in on all of this for the Dog Nation cruise. So Jessica Slater is a great travel agent. She's got a website, royaldogs.com. Do we have Jessica's phone number here? I want to give that out there as well. But royaldogs.com, great website for you to go to. It's a website that Jessica has made. Jessica's a travel agent specifically selected for us by Royal Caribbean to book the Dog Nation cruise, to kind of help plan the Dog Nation cruise, because you got to understand something. Like, independence of the seas is a wonderful thing anyway. You got great specialty restaurants. You've got wonderful entertainment options like Broadway-style shows and live music and all that kind of stuff. We're going to go to Perfect Day Coco Cay and Nassau in the Bahamas, and that's all really well there too. But there's also some special Dog Nation themed events that you only get for being a part of the Dog Nation cruise, and Jessica Slater's got you on that. So you can give her a call, 770-718-9147, 770-718-9147. Jessica's really our personal travel agent there as well. My wife's been on the phone with her a lot this week. You know, some things we had for our cruise that we kind of wanted to do, some restaurant reservations and things like that. And Jessica's just on it, man. She's always taking good care of us. So when it comes to getting your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation booked, whether it be this one or any other one, trust me, I can tell you that Jessica will do a great job for you on that because she's taking really, really good care of me and our family. So we appreciate that. The bottom line is it's April 24th through the 28th. You got to get there. You got to be a part of it. It is time to get it booked. It's time to get it done. It's going to be enormous, gigantic, way, way bigger than our original Dog Nation cruise a year ago. One of the biggest things we've ever done here at Dog Nation when it's all said and done. So I can't wait to celebrate that with all of you. That is going to be a great time. All right, so with that said, let's go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean here right now. And as many of you are aware, the final coaches poll is public. So the AP poll is public all the time. The final coaches poll, the ballots are released. And it's always kind of interesting to see who votes for whom in a situation like that. And Brett McMurphy on Twitter shared us a little bit of an example of how that Nick Saban's final coaches poll ballot, by the way, not every coach votes in the coaches poll. It kind of rotates from year to year. But Nick Saban's final ballot and Kirby Smart's final ballot looked a good bit different. Kirby Smart now uses the kind of logic that a lot of people would. He kind of essentially leans in the direction of head-to-head. He's got Georgia at number 1. He's got TCU at number 2 because TCU beat everybody else. Michigan at number 3 because they had beaten Ohio State, who he has at number 4. Then he's got Tennessee at number 5 and Alabama at number 6. And to me, you can have a different way of looking at this, but Kirby's ballot's not controversial at all because he just essentially follows head-to-head logic. TCU beat Michigan, who beat Ohio State. Tennessee beat Alabama, and there you go. That's what he's got. Nick Saban, self-serving as always, though, had a very different ranking. He had Georgia at number 1. He had Tennessee, the team that beat him, at number 6. He had Ohio State way down number 5. Michigan at number 4. The national runner-up TC at number 3. He had himself at number 2. Like, is there anything cornier than that? It's like Nick Saban voted Alabama number 2. Trust me when I tell you, the only people thinking about Alabama as much as Alabama is just Alabama. Like, you know, the idea that, second best team in the country, that's what that proves. Because they beat Kansas State in a bowl game, that's putting a lot of weight into that Sugar Bowl. Now, listen, I will tell you this, is that Bama's performance against Kansas State, paired with Tennessee's performance against Clemson, paired with Georgia's performance against TCU, I think you can make a pretty good case that the top of the SEC proved how strong this league is. Bottom part of the league did not fare well in bowl games. The top part of the league obviously did. I think it demonstrates the SEC strength. I think it I mean, we'll do the same thing again next year. We'll pretend that the conferences are somehow on a level playing field against each other, and then we'll have SEC dominance in these big games. We'll remind you again that it was a farce and a joke, just like it kind of always is. So, I mean, I do think Alabama proved something about itself in the SEC a little bit in how it beat Kansas State. I do not think it proved itself to be the second-best team in the country. I just don't think that it did. I mean, why would Alabama be ranked ahead of Tennessee? Tennessee also won its bowl game too, and I think in the eyes of most people it beat a better team in Clemson to do so. Like on the basis of what is Alabama better than Tennessee? Certainly not on the basis of head-to-head because Tennessee beat it. But just sort of goes to show you what Nick Saban is. I mean, this stage of Nick Saban's life, he's like that aging rock star. It's like back in the 80s he was doing stadium tours. Now he's doing casino ballrooms. I mean, it's just one of those things of like, the greatest hits album, boy, that was a big deal. But now the people that, love that album, now their grandparents, it's one of those deals where it's like, what you used to be and what you are now are two very different things. And everybody in the world sort of knows that, but you. I just sort of feel like that's kind of where we are with Nick Saban here at this point in time. But he had his team number 2 in the coaches poll. So I guess congratulations to him on that. And frankly, some of those Alabama folks will claim this is a national title probably. But nonetheless, that's the story. Now, let me tell you what's a more interesting story than that. I got to tell you, I am very intrigued by this. Clemson has stepped up to the plate and made a big boy hire. So Brandon Streeter, who had been with the program for a long time, had been kind of graduated offensive coordinator. And most people would have said this felt like a mistake when it happened. Clemson's been one of those programs, and listen, this is not me being snarky. I'm not trying to be sarcastic. Dabo was not a coordinator. He was wide receivers coach before he became Clemson head coach. He was not a coordinator. Therefore, Clemson has always been a very coordinator-dependent program because somebody's got to do the actual coaching. Now, I'm not telling you that Dabo's incapable of coaching, but he's not a coordinator. In other words, if every one of Georgia's defensive coaches got mad and went home, Kirby could still run the defense because he used to be a defensive coordinator. He has some coaching expertise. I honestly don't know that Dabo Swinney has the expertise to run a side of the ball. His would be more likely offense. I don't think that Dabo Swinney necessarily has the coaching expertise to run a side of the ball. And therefore, if you don't have that, then you're always going to be really coordinator dependent. Well, for a long time, Dabo had Brent Venables as defensive coordinator. You had a string of very successful offensive coordinators who all left and got promoted. Chad Morris kind of started that deal, and you've had Jeff Scott, and on and on you want to go with the guys who've run that Clemson offense. Well, a lot of those guys finally started leaving. And so last year, Clemson looked around and said, do we want to go outside for an offensive coordinator or do we want to promote from within? Well, they promoted from within at a time which the Clemson offense had actually sort of gotten pretty stale, and that was clearly a disaster. Most people predicted it would be, and it worked out to be exactly the way that a lot of folks thought it would. So now, needing an upgrade on offense, really seeing that be a real Achilles heel the last couple of years, they go out and hire Garrett Riley away from TCU. Now, on the one hand, I do sort of laugh at the idea that Clemson's big hire is a guy that just scored all of 7 points in 60 minutes against Georgia. I do realize that there's a degree to which that sort of seems funny, but honestly, I'm not even being sarcastic about that either. I think this is a good hire. It's Lincoln Riley's brother. Looks a lot like Lincoln Riley, to be honest with you. I think this really is a good hire, and I do think that if you pair a guy like Riley with Klubnik, who would appear to have emerged their starting quarterback, then I do think this could make Clemson a lot more dangerous in the ACC. I'm going to take this from a couple of angles here really quick. Clemson is not going to be the highest-rated ACC team in the preseason. That's going to be Florida State, and that's obviously with good reason. Florida State was a really good team this past year, but it is also pretty common for these teams that are like predicted to take that big next step forward and kind of make good on kind of a hot team one year to be the championship contender the next year. And what we oftentimes find out is that next step is a doozy. That going from like really good team to like championship contending team, taking that next step up is not always quite as easy to do as you might think. Which to me kind of opens the door back up for Clemson a little bit this year. I don't want to oversell Clemson, I really don't. But Alabama would sort of stand there and assume that they are the non-playoff team from this year, the most likely to sort of step back and compete again next year. Who has the better offensive coordinator right now, Alabama or Clemson? I'd say Clemson does. Who has the better quarterback right now, Alabama or Clemson? I'd say Clemson on the base of the fact we don't know who Alabama's quarterback is. Who has the better overall talent? That's Alabama by a long shot. But guess what? There have been a couple of years in the past we thought that was true, and Clemson beat Alabama head-to-head. Here's the point that I'm getting to, and I promise you I'm not going to oversell Clemson, but I do think this is a pretty big-time hire. And in terms of the non-playoff teams that think they can be in the playoff next year, I think Clemson reasserted itself in this conversation a bit. I do. And I think it may, come at the expense of a team like Alabama, who is just not as good as they think they are. But there you go on that. I was going to do an Emmitt Smith type deal. I don't have time for it. Let me just say this real quick. So Emmitt Smith was on a Sirius XM radio show, and he was trying to preach patience with Florida fans when it comes to Billy Napier. I mean, I don't think you have any choice but to be patient. But here's the thing I'm going to say about Napier. You have got to give people something for a year on the job. You can ask for patience when you first get hired, but after a year, you better give them some proof. And this is the thing that people don't realize about Kirby Smart, is that Smart's first year on the job did not seem all that successful by even Georgia standards prior to him getting hired. Georgia had regularly been a 10-win team prior to Kirby getting hired, and in Kirby's year, they only went 8-5, and they had to beat TCU in the Liberty Bowl to get to 8. Like that didn't seem all that successful. But if you look deeper, Kirby gave you a top 10 recruiting class that year. Would you finish 6th or 7th, somewhere along that lines? I would say it's the best recruiting class ever for a coach that had never coached a game before. So he gave you some proof. On the field that year, Georgia had a lot of bad losses, but as a double-digit underdog, they beat a top 10-ranked Auburn team. Gave you something on the field as well. Gave you a bowl win. It didn't matter all that much, but at least took the bitter taste of some of those losses out to say you get to 8 wins. At least you got to pose with a trophy at the end of the season. The point is that Kirby's first year wasn't great, and it's a huge outlier compared to everything else that Georgia's done since then, but at least it was something. For now, Billy Napier doesn't have anything, and I'm very curious to see what happens with Rashada here on this particular Friday. We talked about Jaden Rashada yesterday about is he coming to Florida, is he not? There's conflicting stuff out there on that. Almost all of this seems related to NIL. I mean, the thing about Billy Napier is he may go on to be a good coach, but he has zilch to show for his first year on the job. On the field, for the most part, in recruiting as well. So if you're going to keep asking for patience from Florida fans, you've got to give them something. Success leaves clues. It always has. It always will. People who are on their way to some great accomplishment are dropping hints about that along the way. And Billy Napier's not dropping anything to suggest that he's got some bright future ahead of him. So that is that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. All right, so I told you, I have the biggest unanswered question as it relates to Georgia here this season. And I want to go way back to the Tennessee game here for a moment. You remember the story of that game. Georgia built a big lead. Georgia could obviously see that its defense was going to shut down Tennessee. Rain sort of came in, which brought the idea of turnovers into the discussion a little bit more. Georgia, knowing that it really didn't need to do anything else to win that game, decided not to do anything else and just claim victory, run out the clock, and it obviously beat, at that time, number 1 ranked Tennessee. And if you in any way think that I am poorly describing what happened that particular Saturday, Kirby Smart said this, not knowing it was being recorded, in the locker room after the game, admitting that they basically decided to pull the plug on the Georgia offense there that day. Let me give you a reminder. This is Kirby from the post-game locker room after Georgia beat number 1 Tennessee back earlier this year. Here's Kirby.
Don't ever underestimate the power of physical toughness. And physical toughness wins in football now. And if you in this room, you got it. And if you come in here, you better believe in it. Because this physical toughness, it's what makes the difference. Hell of a job, both units. Complementary football. I mean, offense, y'all were explosive, aggressive, and really, we took the ball out of your hands some steps. You know what I mean? 'Cause it was wet and nasty. We played like we had to play to win the game. Okay? Did a hell of a job being explosive, though. You guys have done it. I ain't been around a group as connected as much love as they got in this room.
So here's my biggest unanswered question for the 2022 season. What if Georgia didn't call off the Dogs against Tennessee? What would have happened that day? Georgia just beat TCU in the national championship game 65-7. Scored 42 points against Ohio State. Scored 50 against LSU. What if Georgia didn't call off the Dogs against Tennessee? Because it's obvious that day that defensively, Georgia had Tennessee figured out much the same way they had figured out TCU the other night. And, TCU coming into the game had been one of the highest scoring teams in the country. They'd scored more than 41 points per game. And Georgia got off to the offensive start against Tennessee a lot like they got off to the offensive start against TCU the other night. Because ultimately, once TCU realized we can't stop them on offense, we're not moving the ball on defense, or reverse that, we can't stop their offense, we're not moving the ball against their defense. Once they realized that, they were just looking for a soft place to land. Is that not exactly how the first half of the Tennessee game played out as well? That Georgia was there to play defensively. They were going to get after Hendon Hooker all day long. And Georgia was also doing whatever it wanted to do offensively. And once Georgia built the big lead, once the rain came in, and once they decided, well, Tennessee's not going to do anything, they decided, well, let's just get out of here with a victory and let's don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. What if they didn't do that? How bad could Georgia have beaten Tennessee that particular day? Now, I'm not saying they would have beaten them 65-7 because, gosh, it's hard to beat anybody 65-7. But I think when you see the unmerciful slaughter that Georgia delivered to the hands of TCU, I think you're led to believe Georgia could have made it pretty ugly against Tennessee if it wanted to. So anyway, that's just sort of my big unanswered question. The fact that, the kind of the big game, the big moment, the one in which Georgia fans are pretty angry about going into that. I think the Georgia team itself is pretty angry going into that. And then ultimately, the way in which the game played out didn't lend itself to Georgia trying to do much more than it needed to. But what if it wanted to? How much worse could it have made that? I think we found out against TCU that if they wanted to, they could have made it a whole lot worse. So maybe just something to think about. That may be standing as my biggest unanswered question from the season that was. All right, a couple of things here just for a moment. First of all, on Fridays around here, we love going into the weekend. And we like a big finish to the week to get us there. We don't like to mail things in around here. We want to finish just as strong on Fridays as we do any other show of the week. And, of course, our big finish presented by the Finish Long Drink is a great way to do that because, listen, we believe that weekends are for having a good time, and whether that be watching football or getting outdoors or doing whatever it is you're doing, we think the Finish Long Drink is a great place to go to have the good time that you want to have. So we like to celebrate folks enjoying that Finish Long Drink. In fact, we showed one of these for our Golden Shoe of the Day, but I'm going to give Dina a little bit of a shout out here for the big finish there as well because she says that she is ready for that national championship celebration. Got those Finish Long Drink big cans. She had the HBTFD glasses to kind of pour her Finish Long Drink into. So we already said that it looks like a beer, but it's not. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. What that means is if you like mixed drinks, things like that, you can sort of pop it and drink it out of the can as if it is a mixed drink, or you can do like Dina was doing there. You can pop the top on the can and just sort of pour it into the glass, and you have a ready-to-drink cocktail right there. It's almost like you're a bartender or a professional mixologist without actually having to be one. So that is terrific. And if you have not done what Dina has done, which is try the Finish Long Drink, right now is a great time to do it. You can go to thelongdrink.com, and you can put in your zip code, and you can find out where you can pick some up. Beverage stores and bars and restaurants, all kinds of things around your area. I see a lot of golf courses and things like that. You can find that online at thelongdrink.com. And you can decide for yourself which version of the Finish Long Drink do you want to try, whether it's the cranberry or what I like, which is kind of the traditional. It's the blue can. You see that on your screen there. It's the traditional, the blue can. It's got the citrus flavor. It's got the gin kick. There's also the Long Drink Zero. That's no carbs, no sugar. Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. I know some of y'all like that. So find the Long Drink online, thelongdrink.com. You can try some Finish Long Drink here today. Now, I have some bad news and some good news. The bad news here is the college football season is done, and we don't like that very much. We're looking forward to being in Athens tomorrow, but in terms of the games being played, that's now over with. But some good news is there is more sports to be had over the course of the next few months, and trust me, you can sort of dive into this, and then by the time, before you even realize it, we're right back to doing college football all over again with spring practice and everything else like that. In fact, we are here. Is it wild card weekend in the NFL right now? Is this wild card weekend coming up? Surely it's got to be getting close. I feel like it probably is. That gives you an idea how much I've been following the NFL, but I feel like we're at wild card weekend. So anyway, you can kind of dive in there. You can kind of get going on that, and you can get some action down on whatever's going on in pro football. You like to watch basketball. How about putting a bet down on Mike White and the Georgia basketball team right now? Because let me tell you something right now. That team looks good. The recent bracketology came out. They did not have Georgia in there as of yet, but you keep getting more wins like you've gotten recently. Mississippi State, Auburn. That's a team you may be betting on come March Madness time. The point is, whatever you think you might like to bet on, our friends at MyBookie have an opportunity for you to do that. And Now that the season's done, you need a new hobby, something to kind of pass your time. Go ahead and open that account at MyBookie. Use the promo code DawgNation. That's all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, DAWG. Use that promo code DawgNation, and then after that, you get the big deposit bonus. That means up to $1,000, you put money in your account. Our friends at MyBookie are going to give you that same amount right back there in your account. You put in $400, they're going to put into your account $400. You got $800 in your account, you haven't even won your first bet yet. That's how much fun it is with our friends at MyBookie. Then after that, you play, you win, you get paid. Find MyBookie online. Promo code DawgNation. Promo code DawgNation. They're on all of that. So make sure you check them out today. Our friends at MyBookie. Use the promo code DawgNation. All right, let's wrap up the show. All right, we got a great collection of golden shoes to give out here today. Jeff said we give away 1,000. We don't quite have 1,000 to give out, but we're going to give away a few. Our buddy Brian Whitehead sent this to me. So last year, I loved wearing the scarf, that I got in Indianapolis. It was a gift from the committee last year. Did not get a scarf here this year, but Brian Whitehead says, I'm sorry, I didn't get one. Says that to me, but Brian says he got his. That does look good. I may have to go to the store and just buy that so I can have my national championship scarf. We have to keep up with tradition after all around here. So, Brian, good stuff to you. We'll give you a golden shoe for what is a great-looking national championship scarf. How about our next one here just for a moment? Let's see if we got the rest of our golden shoes to give out here. There we go. Georgia on Tap shared this. I guess Connor Riley got this video. It's awesome. You can see it at DawgNation.com. You originally saw this on ESPN, Kirby Smart doing kind of like the sort of 3 fingers in the air to talk about winning a 3rd national title. So Connor had this on Twitter, and Georgia on Tap shared it with me. I love this because, like, the ESPN view is obviously Kirby from the front. You see him doing the 1, then the 2, then the 3. It's almost like an homage to what Michael Jordan did after the Bulls won one of their championships. But Connor's kind of got almost like the point of view of Kirby here, kind of looking from over the shoulder as he holds up the 3 fingers. It's an awesome shot. It really is. And I appreciate Georgia on Tap sharing that. So I'll give Georgia on Tap a golden shoe. He's won a handful of those now. I'll give one to Connor Riley there as well for kind of getting in deep and getting embedded there with Georgia on that. I believe we have one more golden shoe to give away here. Let's do that. Brian Little shares it and says, the family locked and loaded for the dog celebration tomorrow. Go for 2 in 22. So he's got his tickets. He's ready to go. So, Brian, we hope to see you there in Athens tomorrow, and to all of DawgNation who's going to be on hand there for that. We appreciate that there as well. We're looking forward to seeing all of you tomorrow for the big celebration. So congratulations to all of our golden shoe winners. By the way, lousy, stinking Gators, they have no national title to celebrate. They don't have anything to celebrate, not in a long time anyway. And 288 days from now, it gets even worse as Georgia beats up on those lousy, stinking Gators once again. We'll make that our Gatorade countdown, and we'll see all of you back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll talk to you then, everybody. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. We got a little bit of breaking news here there as well. Jeff told you about Jacob Hood, the offensive lineman, going to the transfer portal. Also, Tresman Marshall going to the transfer portal there as well. So we kind of knew there'd be a little bit of a, sort of flood of names kind of coming in here. Marshall becomes the latest. I loved what Kirby Smart said on Tuesday, that there were a lot of guys who knew they were transferring from Georgia, and they were willing to keep it quiet and work hard and go through this national championship and college football playoff run because that's how committed they wanted to be to the team. Kirby Smart said that made him want to cry, and I just think that's the appropriate sentiment. The level of team-first attitude that Georgia displays is a really, really cool thing. It is. It's just a really, really cool thing. So to guys like Trez, to guys like Ryland Godey, I mean, imagine being Ryland Godey from him. You're a 4-star tight end coming out of high school, like a very, very good prospect. And Georgia essentially signs the Avengers into your position group. Brock Bowers is faster than a superhero. Darnell Washington's bigger than a superhero. Oscar Delp's sort of a combination of the two. Ryland's going to go somewhere. I believe he's going to play, and I think he's going to play really well. So, Tresman Marshall's a guy like that. That's a guy you think people don't want Tresman Marshall out of the transfer portal? Of course they do. But it's tough. I mean, Jamon Dumas-Johnson was the Butkus Award finalist. I'm not even sure he was the best linebacker on the Georgia team by the end of the year. And I say that with all due respect to Pop, who's obviously phenomenal. Did y'all watch Smile Mon in the national championship game? What in the world was he doing? He's flying to the ball 100 miles an hour. So, I mean, it's just hard to play at Georgia. It's very hard to play at Georgia. And in Tresman's case, I mean, look, I'd love to know for guys like that, and Ryan Davis is a little bit like this too. It's like, could you have been fully healthy for the entirety of your Georgia career? How much of a difference would that have made? And I'm not saying, look, Georgia's been fine at linebacker. I'm just saying in the case of Marshall, like how much different could his career have been had he been healthier early on? Because that early developmental phase, I just don't think you can't put a price tag on being healthy enough to practice. We always kind of think about who's healthy enough to play, but in the early days of your Georgia life, it's being healthy enough to practice that really matters, because practice is where you learn what it's all about. Practice is where you make a name for yourself. Practice is where you develop the self-confidence to endure what's coming later on. Because if you can handle a Georgia practice, you can handle about anything. Georgia hits during practice. They hit frequently during practice. And if you can handle that, then you're a football player. And that's good, well-earned self-confidence that you can use for other things. And so the one thing we knew is good Georgia players were going to be leaving this team. We just knew that was the case. Georgia's not going to be immune to this any more than anybody else is. And so we're kind of finding out now about a few more of those names. I don't think there's been any huge surprise as of yet. And look, you got to be honest about this too. The 3 linebackers that Georgia is signed to come in for the class of 2023, that's about as good a trio as anybody's ever brought in. So in addition to 2 starters who are otherworldly right now, you've got 3 guys coming in. C.J. Allen was apparently tearing it up on scout team. This guy was in high school 5 minutes ago, and he was one of the stars of the scout team getting ready for the national championship. So, I just don't know. It's just very hard. It's very hard to find a home at Georgia right now. And listen, I'd shake every one of their hands if I could. They contributed to a championship. Nobody became a distraction. As far as I know, Bill Norton was the only guy that left, and maybe leaving is what he needed to do for his specific circumstances. I can't fault the guy if that was the case. But I'm pretty sure, am I right about this, that Norton was the only guy that really left? That's amazing to me. The pillow is not. The pillow is like it's like multicolored. It's like it's a gradient. It's a gradient look. Don't be knocking the pillow now. Look, at the beginning of the year, they were sleeping on Georgia. At the end of the year, this is what Georgia's sleeping on. Some of y'all wish you had a pillow like this. Jonathan Aaron says, with the back-to-back natties, I think everyone's going to want to come here, so I think the rich are getting richer. I do as well. I see a lot of recruiting momentum for Georgia right now. I really do. And I just see it. I think that right now Georgia is having its way on the recruiting trail the best I can tell. Spencer Clark compares Mondon to Leonard Floyd. Yeah, Mondon was kind of under the radar for a minute. And I'm just telling you, his closing speed, I love to watch that. And I'm not an X's and O's guy. I don't care that much about that. It's not that interesting to me. I just like to watch football. And I love an underneath throw or like a reverse or like a toss sweep type thing. I love to watch a Georgia player take off on a kind of an underneath situation where the ball's in front of them. I just like to watch their closing speed. What Smile Mondon does going after the football is, it's like space age stuff. It really is. It's really, really, it's really something. Frederick Meredith says Beck's not a statue, but Brock Vandegrift's mobility is going to keep him in the competition. Yeah. Part of me wants to say, and I'd be open to the idea that I'm wrong about this. Part of me wants to say, do I want to say this? I'm tempted to want to say that Vandegrift's the best athlete in the competition. But that may be misunderstanding that Stockton is an athlete, just a little bit different kind of athlete. I think that Vandegrift's got that sort of rangy kind of, mobility a little bit that allows him to keep plays alive. But we saw Gunner as a runner in high school that, he can go get those rushing yards. Gunner's also kind of a thicker athlete, so it may be unfair to say that Vandegrift's a better athlete than Gunner because I don't know that to be sure. But they're both, I think, really athletic. And the point is that obviously right now Beck's the favorite to win the job. He is. He's the favorite to win the job. He's the backup quarterback this year. That makes him the favorite to win the job. But I do believe the tangible and intangible qualities that the other two guys have could make them factors here. I really am open for I'm open for anything happening. I really am. And I'll give you an example. This just popped in my mind. We have seen surprising quarterback competitions before. We've seen this. I mean, Stetson Bennett would obviously be an example of that first and foremost. But for whatever reason, this is kind of what popped in my mind. We have some Alabama fans who are watching right now. Tell me if I'm not right about this. In 2014, nobody expected Blake Sims to be the Alabama quarterback, right? That was thought to be – it's probably thought to be Jake Coker's job, right? That Coker was the heir apparent. He was supposed to be the back. He had been the backup. He was supposed to be the starter. I mean, some of y'all who are Bama fans, you tell me if I'm wrong about this. And Coker eventually became that guy in 2015. But in 2014, the guy that led him to the playoff that year was Blake Sims. So I don't know why this example popped in my head. There's probably other ones. This is just what came to mind right now, is that quarterback competitions are not always automatic. And this is not like the constitutional line of succession for the presidency. Like, it's not one of those things of, well, because you were number 2, now you're number 1. It doesn't necessarily have to work out that way. It doesn't always work out that way. So I would assume that Carson Beck gets the first snap of the first spring practice as the number 1 quarterback. And I guess the safest bet is to assume that he's also the starter for the first game next season against Tennessee, Martin, or Ball State, or whoever it is that Georgia's playing. That September schedule, y'all, it's not pretty. And it's not Georgia's fault, but it's not pretty. So I guess I would say that Beck is the favorite to do that. Certainly be the point spread favorite. But could I see almost anything happening in this quarterback competition? You better believe I would. You better believe I could. You better believe I could. I wouldn't count out Brock Vandagriff. Brock Vandagriff about to graduate. I mean, he's clearly a sharp guy. He's about to graduate. I've heard great things about Gunnar Stockton. I wouldn't count him out either. I wouldn't count him out by a long shot. So, yeah, Beck is the favorite. I would say just about anything could happen because in college football in certain situations we've seen somewhat surprising quarterback outcomes. Let's see what else. Foster Moss says, where are we setting up tomorrow? So I'm going to try to be in that sort of dog walk area where I typically am. We're going to have people hopefully up and down the parade route, but that's where I'm going to kind of be. So if you're, and it's going to be a different dog walk spot now. It's not going through the Tate parking lot tomorrow. It's going through that little, courtyard area, kind of in between the bookstore and the Tate Center on the other side. So I'm going to be in that area somewhere. Spencer Clark says Beck's going to pass probably for yards and sets, more yards than Stetson did this year, even eclipsing the 4,000-yard mark. Could happen, might be true. But some of y'all are way more confident about something you've never seen than I am. And this is one of my rules in life. I try not to be too confident for the positive or the negative about something I've never seen. And I have never seen Carson Beck, at least in terms of long, extended playing time. I've seen him playing a little bit here, a little bit there. And if he's the Georgia starting quarterback, my assumption is he'll be as good as the typical Georgia starting quarterback is, which has obviously proved to be pretty good. But in terms of, I already know for a fact he's better than Stetson Bennett is, or I already know for a fact that he's not going to be anywhere near as good as Stetson Bennett is. I try not to have a whole lot of confidence about things I haven't seen before. And I haven't seen Carson Beck. And so, whatever your opinion about anything is, just keep in mind that if it's something related to Beck, one way or another, it's not related to very much in the way of evidence. He looks good throwing the ball in videos. We see a lot of videos. He looks good throwing the ball in those videos. He does. But I'm going to hold off making some sort of prediction about how good he's going to be in the actual games until I actually see him playing some games. Alan Hampton says that Stockton's got the talent and the intangible similar to Bennett. It's probably not a bad comparison. I do think the team likes Gunnar a lot. I do. Listen, I think there's something about being that scout team quarterback. And listen, this is not me saying that Gunnar's going to get the job. It's not. I don't know who's going to get the job. I don't know. As I said before, Carson Beck's the safest bet. But it's probably not a coincidence that, Stetson's running around like Baker Mayfield in 2017, and he earned a lot of confidence from his teammates for how he did all of that. You got Gunnar doing some of that same kind of stuff right now. I guess the story is that Gunner took off the black non-contact jersey. I believe Kirby Smart said this. Took off the black non-contact jersey and became just a regular football player. You think Gunner Stockton, mine's getting hit? First of all, he's built up, pretty rocked up as it is. And he took a bunch of shots in high school. The night we saw him play Thomasville, and Thomasville was a good team that year. He like Rocky Balboa. He's bleeding from the chin. He just kept going back out there and kept fighting, kept doing it. He didn't have the team that night to win that game. Thomasville was the better team. Gunner was getting absolutely obliterated. They were coming at this. Is sometimes what you see in high school football. Sometimes when a team has a really good quarterback, it's gotten to be one of those things where the opposition says, all right, he may beat us by 100 points. We're going to come after him. That's what Blessed Trinity did that night against Trevor Lawrence. And that's pretty much what Thomasville did against Gunner Stockton. They just came after him and said, if you can avoid our pass rush, then you're going to get your names in the history book for how many yards you pass for. But we're going to come after you. And that particular night, Thomasville got after him in the same way that BT had kind of gotten after Lawrence a couple years prior to that. But anybody who watched that game we saw for Gunner, and Gunner had obviously a million great games as a record-setting player, but anybody who saw him that night, the one thing you'll never question about Gunner Stockton is how tough he is. And if you're a quarterback and you want to win over this Georgia team, you better be tough. You better be tough. You better be mentally tough. You better be physically tough. You better, if you want to earn the faith, can you imagine trying to win over these players, these teammates? Can you imagine in this group of alphas, trying to say, hey, I'm the guy that's going to lead y'all? Can you imagine how hard that'd be? You better be willing to go out there and be a part of the physical part of this game if you want to be able to do that. And that's going to be the question that all these quarterbacks have to face. Taylor Russell also says that Gunner Stockton has a great football name for a quarterback. It is a great name. I mean, it is a great name. If you're not the Georgia quarterback, I mean, you got to go be like a Texas Ranger or something, right? Like one of these sheriffs in these like small towns. You got to be Gunner Stockton. I mean, it is a great name. Although I think that, Carson Beck's kind of a cool sounding name too. I like hard consonants. Carson Beck sort of sounds good, easy to remember. Kind of like that. Brock Vandegrift, not too bad. But Gunner Stockton's a great name. It's a great name. I mean, when you name your kid Gunner, you know that he's no less than a 3-star prospect from the time that he's born. I mean, if you give him the name Gunner, you've already kind of. I mean, he's got a 24/7 profile just for having that name. I think you're probably right about that. Green Soldier says that Beck's got good enough legs. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind here too. Is that it's not necessarily about finding the most athletic guy. It's about finding a guy who's athletic enough. And, I think that Stetson Bennett probably has kind of like plus athleticism. I think he's actually going to test pretty well in some of this pre-NFL draft stuff. People are going to find out he's actually a lot faster than you maybe assumed that he was. Stetson has a degree of sort of like plus athleticism. But in the case of Carson Beck, I've never seen anything from him that would lead me to believe he isn't athletic enough. He's not Lamar Jackson, but he's also not a statue either. And there is something about being above the required threshold, being above the line athletically, in the sense that I get is Carson Beck probably is. In other words, do I think that Vandegrift and Stockton are both better athletes than Beck? I probably do. Do I think that necessarily matters? I'm not sure that it does, because I do believe that Beck is probably athletic enough. I think that what Green Soldier said is probably right on that. Let's Go Brandon says that Hudson Mason was a great name too. But I mean, like Gunner Stockton, that just sounds good. Huffer Billy Paw says that Gunner may shock some folks. I like Carson's talent. I like Gunner's toughness. I mean, here's the thing. This ought to be fun because all three of these guys have a lot to like. I'm telling you right now, I liked Brock Vandegrift in high school a lot. And I'm not a scout. I don't care to be. I'm not pretending to be. I liked Vandegrift in high school a lot. And I haven't seen a ton of him in college, and frankly, I haven't heard a ton of him since being in Georgia. It's been a little bit quiet on the Vandegrift front, I would say, for the most part. But I liked him in college a lot. I should say in high school a lot. So if this is your competition, a guy like Beck who's been here, a guy like Gunner Stockton who is kind of earned respect as he's played as the scout team quarterback. He was a record-setting high school guy. Brock Vandegrift, dad's a coach, sharp, guy, about to graduate, got a little bit of maturity to him. I mean, if this is the three guys that are competing to be your starting quarterback, that's not a bad competition. And it shouldn't be one of those deals where, battle lines get drawn and fans get angry. Shouldn't have anything like that with this because they all seem like good options. The one thing about Kirby Smart, he's shown you he's going to play the guy he thinks is the best. And it may not be who the message board thinks is the best, but, Kirby's track record on this is pretty good. So it ought to be, I think, a pretty fun competition. All right, let me go to Facebook for a moment. Over here on Facebook, and pardon me for not getting here sooner. All right, on Facebook. Craig Jones and Ryan Walker talking about Brett Favre being a gunner. Yeah, a little bit like that. Yeah, there's that sort of like cowboy mentality, that certain quarterbacks have. You kind of got that a little bit. Brian Whitehead provides the link to the scarf there. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Ken Holcomb says Kirby would have scored 50 against the Vols had Kirby not called off the Dogs due to the rain. He said, we scored enough to win. That's all you need. Yeah, that's the case. Georgia clearly did enough. But when you see how bad Georgia beat TCU in a similar kind of game, you'll have to conclude, wow, maybe Georgia could have really done some damage that they did against Tennessee, which would have been nice to enjoy. Hugh Nash on the subject of Hudson Mason's name. So this has been like an internet joke for a long time about the Georgia quarterbacks. Like you could reverse the order of their names. They have two last names. Stetson Bennett, Hudson Mason. It's like you could be Bennett Stetson or Mason Hudson. Like you could just reverse the names. It'd be the same thing. I mean, Jake Fromm's a little different than that, but long history of quarterbacks. Aaron Murray, you could be Murray Aaron. Long history of Georgia quarterbacks who have two last names. There's also this sort of thought that Georgia quarterbacks sort of typically have like these very sort of fancy Southern-sounding names. Jeremiah Red said that Kirby was just at Greene County. Bill Sanders says he's coming down there to Houston County. Yeah, you better believe he's doing that. He's going to be visiting all those programs. I mean, listen, if there's a barnstorming trip to go on, there's a few schools and a few counties that they're always going to go over there in that sort of middle Georgia, Bibb County and Houston County and Peach County. Yeah, whatever barnstorming trip's going to be going on, that sort of middle Georgia part of the state's going to get stopped on. You better believe that. What else is going on here? Georgiana Olive says, why make a poor little frog actually a lizard? Just talking about the Shaq things. Yeah, so come to find out the horned frog is a lizard. Come to find out that's true. I guess it can spit blood from its eyes, which is far more dangerous than anything that TCU actually did in the game. Keith Finley says we can't lose Gunnar Stockton in the portal. We just can't. But tell you something, Gunnar Stockton ain't going nowhere. He's not going anywhere. Yeah, that's not happening. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina says he got two turntables and a microphone. The one Stetson dropped on the way out the door. Yeah, so Matt clearly having a good time here today. What else is going on? Ryan Walker says we got a Hugh Green type player in Mana. That's a pretty fun comparison. He says Pops is another Mike Singletary. That's a good comparison too. And he says Beck's got an arm that reminds me of Dan Marino, but he's swagger of Jim Kelly. Definitely got some players. Yeah, this team's gonna be fun to watch next year. It is. It's gonna be fun to watch. I mean, I can't wait. So it could be one of those things where we spend most of the year wondering, well, what will Georgia do if they're ever tested? Will they ever be tested? On the road at Tennessee feels like a decent-sized test. But you may not get much before that. They are on the road, relatively early against Auburn, so it'll be a little something there for that. But you're right, this team is going to be fun to watch. Ooh, Oren Chile asks a very good question. He says, who's on the Mount Rushmore with Stetson and Walker if there are no coaches allowed? That's a very good question because, we've been sort of saying that right now it's Herschel Stet, Vince Kirby as the Mount Rushmore. But if it's only a Mount Rushmore of Georgia players, I think it's pretty easy to make David Pollock your third. They just everything about that feels right to me. It's honoring an era. Pollock's accomplishments are obviously huge. So I think I'm probably right to say it's Herschel, Stetson, Pollock. You say, what about, Champ Bailey, guys like that? I still sort of feel like it's probably Pollock. And then who's that fourth? I mean, don't you have to go back to the ancient times? Charlie Trippi was really, really good. Frank Sinkwich won the Heisman Trophy. It sort of feels like for most people that probably doesn't move the needle quite as much. That's interesting. I feel like the first three are pretty good. Pollock, Stetson, Herschel. The fourth, you may have some disagreement on. Am I right about that? I mean, is Pollock definitely on there if it's just players? Bill Sanders also kind of cast. Isaac Cruz also mentioning Nick Chubb or Sony Michel. With all due respect to Sony Michel, Nick Chubb is close. He really is. Chubb was amazing. Amazing. And it's not just the NFL career, although I do think that Chubb was unfairly shortchanged near the end of his Georgia career. A lot of folks wanted Sony to get more carries in the national championship game. I think people really misunderstand how good Nick Chubb really was. Is Chubb the second best running back that Georgia's ever had? I think he probably is, right? And that's all. And that's all due respect to Gurley and Garrison Hurst and Noshawn Marino. But I think Chubb's the second best running back they've ever had. Buck Brinson mentions Fran Tarkenton. Wasn't Tarkenton a much better player in the NFL, though, than he was in college? Now, I know he was I'm getting a thumbs up there on that. I know he was a big star on the 59 team, and the 59 team was one of those teams my dad would always kind of tell me about. So I know that that he was a big player on a very important Georgia team, kind of one of those pre-Dooley teams that was really, really important. But Tarkenton became a record-setting guy in the NFL. At one point in time, Fran Tarkenton owned about every NFL passing record there was. But he wasn't as good at Georgia as he was in the NFL, right? Brian Whitehead said the Kirby copter just landed at Baldwin County High School. So there you go. Deion Ware also casting his vote for Champ Bailey. He's got Bailey, Walker, Stetson, Gurley. Deion, I believe I'd put Chubb in over Gurley. I do. If it's a second running back for me, that's Chubb over Gurley. Matt Rukavina says, what about Sinkwich, only other Heisman player we have? So Frank Sinkwich may deserve to be on there, but most of our audience is just not going to do that because they didn't see him play. And I guess I'm probably tempted to want to make a different pick too because it is so long ago. But you're right, he won the Heisman Trophy. And I wrote about this before the Ohio State game. Georgia should have been the 1942 national champions. They were, but I'm talking about they should have been the AP national champions. I feel like they probably got shortchanged the way a lot of Southern teams did back then. And Trippi's last team in 46, they definitely should have been considered. Georgia should actually claim, while we're putting numbers on the wall, they've already kind of put the 2022 national title on the indoor, and they'll hang the flag tomorrow. They should just hang a flag for 1946. I can promise you this. Go back and look at that 46 season. There have been way more specious national title claims in the 46 team. So I feel like they should claim one there. And this is the right time to do it. If you start claiming 46 when you're not doing very well, it sort of feels like you're pencil whipping the way that Alabama once did when they started bringing up national championships out of nowhere. But if you claim the 46 title while you're also claiming the two most recent titles, you've got the freedom to do whatever you want right now. So I feel like they should do that. I'll also tell you this story about Frank Sinkwich. A guy told me this many years ago. He's like a TV type guy. There's actually not a ton of footage out there of Frank Sinkwich. And what the guy told me is that in the old days, you know how you talk about something ends up on the cutting room floor? You've heard that said before. In the old days, as you might imagine, editing was editing. You took the film clip and you cut it. And so all the good highlights of Frank Sinkwich were cut out of the film clips. And they just sort of been lost to time. So what he said to me was, if you ever watch old footage of Sinkwich, a lot of this is just regular run into the line of scrimmage type plays, not the highlight stuff, because over the course of time, those highlight plays got cut out of the reel. what was told to me. So I think that probably impacts the way in which we view Singwich. The fact we don't really view him at all. There's very little footage out there of him. But he won the Heisman Trophy at a time in which there's some very good players in college football. So Griffin Baird said Terry Hogue also finished fifth in the Heisman. 43-3-1 was his all-time record at Georgia. That's a very fair name to bring up. I do think there's a chance that Hogue is not properly considered at Georgia. I think that's very, very fair. Very fair. Because we're kind of in a day and age when Georgia's had this like great run of safeties, and you start thinking about who are the greatest safeties of all time, and you have a tendency to want to look at just the guys who played under Kirby Smart. But a guy like Hogue definitely deserves that consideration. Miriam Corbin said her dad said that Singwich was an amazing player. So there you go on that. Ken Feinberg also said that Hogue blocked a key field goal in the Sugar Bowl to help win the national title. See, that's an example of his legacy at Georgia. Ken, I appreciate you sharing that. Philip Jordan Wells says, go check Fanatics. There's shortness on the 42 title. I got to tell you, on the list of things that I have a problem with Fanatics on, that 42 national title omission may simply just be one thing on there. I'm not loving some of their gear right now, but I guess it's a different story for a different day. Matt Rugavina says, never forget, Tech hasn't won an actual outright national title since 1928. Yeah, I believe I'm right about this. Tech, who claims 4 national titles, I do not believe at any point in time in their life they've ever been number 1 in the AP poll. Isn't that true? I think that's right. I don't think they've ever been number 1 in the AP poll. All right, quick final spin around the comment section. I've got a meeting, so I've got to go. I'm going to be in trouble. All right, at DawgNation.com very quickly. DT mentioning Scott Warner. We actually had an event with Scott Warner a couple of years ago. It was really fun. I like him a lot. Kevin Butler gets mentioned by Dale. That's the only kicker, I believe, in the College Football Hall of Fame. That's another example, too. Ricky says, what about Eddie Meat Cleaver Weaver? I feel like if we're doing the Mount Rushmore of Georgia nicknames, Meat Cleaver Weaver is definitely on there. There's no question about that. Senior Dog 54 says, how could you leave off Bill Stanfield off your Mount Rushmore? Well, the problem is there's only room for 4. But I get your point, Senior. He's a very good player there as well. This is a fun conversation. The problem is you can't have it without alienating somebody who deserves to be on there, and that's what makes it fun. Chad Buchanan says, this may not be relevant, but one of my favorite players was Greg Blue. If you're putting the list of like players that you just love to watch, Blue would be on there for a lot of people. Of course, Greg Blue would be arrested today for some of the stuff he used to do on a football field. You think that Ohio State fans are mad at Javon Bullard? Like, what would modern-day fans be saying about Greg Blue and some of the stuff he was doing in the early 2000s? Those are the biggest hits I believe I've ever seen. Blue and Thomas Davis back then were just leveling people. Absolutely. All right, back to YouTube. Then we're going to go. Boy, comments are flying in here. Taylor Russell says Blue was an assassin. He really was. Fred Gunn says Irk Russell deserves consideration. The original question, though, that Oren asked, though, was if it's a non-coach Mount Rushmore. That was the original question. Foster Moss says, how did that shared title stuff work with both teams getting rings? Like, back in the old days, I don't think they had championship rings. I don't think. And, like, so back then, there were, like, tons of polls. And I guess the AP poll was still sort of thought to be like the biggest of the bunch, but there were tons of polls. And I believe that most of these like national titles where it's like 4 different teams claiming the same year, I think most of that did not come to well after the fact. Like Georgia didn't call itself 1942 national champions until the 80s. That's around that time they started doing that, but a lot of teams did that. So I don't believe the 1942 Georgia Bulldogs ever had a celebration to celebrate being the national champions. I don't think they thought of themselves that way. The honest truth is like for a long time in college football's history, there really wasn't much of a national championship. You wanted to win your conference. You wanted to go to the cool bowl game, and that was sort of enough. Like the idea of a national champion in college football is very much a modern thing anyway. Most programs just didn't really think in those terms. At least that's my understanding. All right. Thomas Bolton says, what about Jordan Davis? I think you'd have to consider him too. He's the most dominant player, I believe, on last year's national championship team, and that certainly makes him worthy of consideration. All right, it is very late. We got to go. Thanks for being here. R.S. Andrews Cooldown. Find R.S. Andrews online for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the prices promised. You can trust them on all of that. Also, don't forget, go to ajc.com/dogsnews, and you can pick up the exclusive memorabilia that celebrates the Georgia National Championship. Also, if you go to that same website, ajc.com/dogsnews, you can find out where they're going to be selling the field editions in person. You just want to drive by and pick one up. They got one coming up in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium parking lot, for instance. And if you want to find out more about that, ajc.com/dogsnews, you can get all the information you need about where to either order your stuff, or if you're in the Atlanta area, where you can swing by and pick some up. I'm going to try to, like last year, we're going to try to do everything we can to make this as available as we possibly can. So please go there to find out more about that, ajc.com/dogsnews for more on that. All right, we got to go for now. So fun stuff. Y'all have a great day, a great weekend. Hope to see you in Athens tomorrow for the championship celebration. And one way or another, we'll see you back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, and our R.S. Andrews Cooldown when it's all said and done. We'll talk to you then, everybody.